Support roles are one of the most confusing and debated topics amongst Overwatch players, so today we're going to take a deep dive into these roles and why they exist. These roles exist within the context of professional play, but aren't completely useless to your average player, so keep this in mind while watching this video. There are two support team roles, main support and flex support. These roles were created back during the early days of Overwatch 1. So, why do these roles exist? These roles exist to categorize heroes based upon historical meta patterns, which allow professional players to specialize in a required niche. These roles are not meant to categorize heroes through their characteristics, but rather through the relationships and the synergies that form over time between heroes, alongside historical meta context. Basically, most meta compositions are one of the main supports plus one of the flex supports. That idea that everything is based around meta patterns is what tends to confuse people. When you hear the terms main support and flex support, you might think of healing output or some sort of difference in utility. In reality, supports are not categorized by either. I cannot stress enough that these terms were created for use within professional play to define hero pools for professional players. They don't exist with your casual player in mind, but they are still important, even just for watching and understanding professional play from an outside perspective. Let's go over which supports fall into each role. The role of main support consists of Lucio, Brig, Mercy, and Lifeweaver. The role of flex support consists of all of the other supports. All of the flex supports are relevant, but only a few of the main supports are relevant, those being Lucio and Brig. Mercy and Lifeweaver, on the other hand, are not played often because they are essentially useless in most situations. I can already hear some of you typing about your 30k heals on Lifeweaver in your gold game. So, slow down. Remember that we're not talking about gold, and we definitely aren't talking about GM or top 500 either. We are talking about a level of play that would leave most of you with a stat line worse than PGEs on Eichenwald. Mercy and Lifeweaver are very bad at the highest level, and this is due to their fundamental design flaws, so they're likely to remain mostly irrelevant for the time being. This is not an opinion, this is a fact. So, now we have our two roles. Main support is the person who plays Lucio and Brig, and flex support is the person who plays everything else. Let's talk about why. Back during the beginning of professional play in Overwatch 1, Lucio was dominant in nearly every single meta, and there was no role lock either. This led to the formation of the main support and flex support roles. Every team needed to play Lucio almost 100% of the time, so they called their Lucio player the main support. Any other support player on the team would be referred to as a flex support. They would play the support heroes and also flex onto other roles such as DPS or tank. So that's like the original basis for the names for the roles. As the meta shifted, the main support was forced to learn a few more heroes. First they had to learn Mercy for Moth meta, and then they had to learn Brig after Goats. Flex support stayed relatively the same until after Goats, when role lock was implemented. From then on, the flex support would just play the support heroes that the main support didn't. That's the broad historical context behind the evolution of the roles of main and flex support. Yes, the names lost their meaning over time due to the changes made to the game. And also, no, the names aren't going to be changing. I often hear players complain about the naming schema for these roles, but something important to remember is that every relevant player in the Overwatch scene understands what these roles are. Professional players know these roles by heart and understand what they mean, so there's no reason to change them and cause more confusion. Also, no singular person has the power to just force everyone to call the role something different, so you really can't just make stuff up. With that being said, just do your best to understand. I know that this is confusing. So, you have the broad historical context, but I know that that is not enough, so we're actually going to talk about the individual supports and their pairings. We will also talk a bit about both double flex support and double main support compositions. Let's begin with main support pairings, starting with Lucio. Lucio works well with a lot of the flex supports and is involved in many modern and older meta compositions. There are 5 compositions that particularly stand out, and I've ordered them based on popularity and historical use. Lucio plus Bap, Lucio plus Kiriko, Lucio plus Ana, Lucio plus Moira, and Lucio plus Zen. Lucio plus Bap is one of the most common bread-and-butter Lucio-based backlines, used to enable most Brawl compositions. You'll see this backline with Reinhardt, Ramatra, Sig, and plenty of other tanks to enable a brawly style of play. Lucio plus Kiriko is also a very common backline. It is usually used in dive compositions and is very mobile, but you can also use it in Brawl compositions for a more survivable backline. You'll see this backline with most tanks in the game due to how versatile it is. Lucio plus Ana is an aggressive dive variant. Ana can be somewhat vulnerable at times, but the backline can apply immense aggressive pressure through nades alongside Lucio dives. You will see this backline with Winston, Diva, Ball, and Doom compositions, especially when up against Brawl compositions. Lucio plus Moira is a specialized Brawl backline. Moira has only ever seen playtime alongside Lucio, and that's because her niche is enabling her team to play very, very fast, which is only possible in conjunction with Lucio. You'll see this backline with Ramatra in the modern day, but it was also often used with rush-oriented Winston or Ball compositions in Overwatch 1. These were known as 6-man. Finally, Lucio plus Zen is a somewhat ancient and retired backline. This was used back in the early days of Overwatch 1. That version of dive is often referred to as classic dive. Think of this variant as an even more aggressive alternative to Ana Lucio. Nowadays, there are better options, so the composition has fallen out of fashion. As you can probably tell, the pattern of main support plus flex support is very dominant in the meta. Not all main support plus flex support combinations are strong, but if a backline is strong, it does tend to be main support plus flex support. Let's take a look at Brig's combinations to get the whole picture. Again, these are ordered based on popularity and historical use. Brig plus Ana, Brig plus Bap, and Brig plus Zen. Brig plus Ana is a very popular backline that has been used in dive compositions. This version of dive plays around a central core backline, rather than committing all of its resources directly into the front line. You will see this backline most often with Winston, Diva, and Doomfist. Brig plus Bap is also a popular backline, used by slower compositions, which could also be referred to as poke compositions. The Brig Bap variant in particular allows these compositions more brawl potential in the mid-fight, and the ability to mark flankers and sustain through dives. You will often see this backline played alongside Sigma. Brig plus Zen is an infamous backline. Although Overwatch 2 exclusive players won't be familiar with this one, I'm sure the Overwatch 1 players watching will. This backline was once one of the most popular and was always used with Ball compositions. You would have a core that also included the off-tank, while the Ball Tracer frontline would dominate different locations on the map. Keep this composition in mind because it does matter for later. Like I mentioned before, both Mercy and Lifeweaver are mostly irrelevant. Mercy was once relevant in Overwatch 1, but we won't be talking about those backlines today. That leaves us with 8 combinations of main support plus flex support. 2 of those combinations, Lucio plus Zen and Brig plus Zen, are no longer relevant, so there are 6 relevant combinations for Overwatch 2. As a general rule, these 6 backlines will take up around 75% of the playtime at the professional level. The frequency of non-MS plus FS compositions varies based on the meta, but usually fluctuates between 0 to 25%, rarely passing the 50% mark. It is also very common for the rate of MS plus FS compositions to reach 90% or even 100%. One example was during the 2022 AL playoffs. Lucio had a 100% playtime. There have been plenty of other time periods where Lucio has had a near 100% playtime during varying metas in Overwatch 1 and Overwatch 2. I'm hoping by this point it is starting to become clear why the support heroes were organized this way. By having one player who knows the main support heroes and one who knows the flex support heroes, they can play most meta compositions. If we were to organize supports by healing or some other trait, the roles would simply cease to be useful. The only way you could get rid of main support and flex support is if you changed the names but kept the heroes in the same spots, because otherwise, again, these roles would be completely useless in any other form. Now, I mentioned that main support plus flex support compositions receive around 75% of the playtime at the professional level. That means that compositions that don't follow the pattern do receive playtime. These compositions fall into 2 groups, double main support and double flex support. Double main is exceptionally rare, with the most prominent example being Jotes, so we won't be covering those backlines today as they are inconsequential. Double flex, on the other hand, has seen use through Overwatch 1 and Overwatch 2, and has only risen in popularity as Overwatch 2 evolves. The best way to universally describe double flex compositions is that they tend to be glass cannons. Let's observe different double flex compositions, and as always, they are ordered based upon popularity and historical use. Bap plus Allari, Bap plus Zen, Ana plus Kiriko, Ana plus Allari, Ana plus Zen, and Bap plus Kiriko. Bap Allari is the most common double flex backline in modern Overwatch 2. It is a composition most often seen with Sigma, and it is most often used on open and long maps. It becomes more difficult to run this composition when lanes get shorter, and it is more difficult to take angles at range. Bap plus Zen used to be the most common double flex backline, but has been greatly overshadowed by Bap Allari. In a sense, Zen and Allari are heroes that play identical roles in the meta in Overwatch 2, but Allari has a bit more flexibility in her playstyle, so she has become the default. Ana plus Kiriko is used in dive compositions and is inherently greedy. This composition is not too dissimilar from Ana Lucio, it's just a bit slower, and the Kiriko does have a bit more frag potential. When playing into a dive mirror, Ana can end up as an easy target, and when playing against Brawl, Ana might lack mobility. Ana plus Allari is similar to Ana Kiriko and is used in dive compositions. The difference is that it's usually used on longer maps where Allari has more room to work with, and plays for ranged angles. This can be an effective variant if your opponent is unable to punish your backline due to map geometry or due to the nature of their own composition. Ana plus Zen is basically Ana Allari, but even greedier. It does the same exact thing, just with more ranged burst damage. This backline is the definition of a glass cannon. BAP plus Kiriko is typically seen with Sigma compositions, and it isn't very common. The reason it isn't very common might have to do with the fact that this backline isn't great at anything. BAP carry doesn't have insane damage numbers or utility to justify picking it over another backline. Yes, the two heroes that everyone seems to love to complain about nowadays and have all the get-out-of-jail-free cards aren't really good together, especially in a competitive environment. That's just how things work out sometimes. There are plenty of double flex compositions, and there are also some interesting cases such as Allari, so we will need to dive a bit deeper to understand this fully. Most of these compositions, as I stated before, are essentially glass cannons. This pattern wasn't necessarily an intentional consequence of the formation of the support roles, but it is a good rule of thumb to remember. The Zen and Allari backlines follow this pattern of glass cannon as well, but there is one problem. Why aren't Zen and Allari considered main supports? Zen used to see playtime alongside a main support in Overwatch 1, but both Brig Zen and Lucio Zen are retired backlines. Allari plays essentially the same role as Zenyatta and fills a very similar niche. During her time in Overwatch 2, she also hasn't played in conjunction with a main support, so why are they flex supports? There is fortunately a reason for this classification, and it all has to do with Zenyatta back in Overwatch 1. Throughout Overwatch 1's competitive lifetime, Zen Lucio, Zen Mercy, and especially Zen Brig were all utilized. Throughout Overwatch 1's final few years, Zen Brig compositions in particular were very common, and this meant that the flex support player became very comfortable with Zen. Double flex support compositions were less popular during Overwatch 1, but BAP Zen in particular was popular in maps such as Havana and Junkertown. If you were a player back on a team in Overwatch 1, consider which of your supports you would want playing each hero. The choice was actually pretty obvious. Your main support player would play Baptiste, while your flex support player would play Zenyatta. Your flex support is placing a ton of their time to practice Zen, so it only makes sense for him to play the Zen. This didn't go for every team, of course. Some teams would have an extra flex support player that they would just throw in for those situations. Sometimes, although this was rare, the main support would play the Zenyatta instead of the Baptiste. But for the most part, when a team didn't have an extra flex support player, the main support would just learn a little bit of Baptiste for those specific situations. With this knowledge in mind, let's consider Allari and Zen in the current day. As you would expect, when Overwatch 2 came around, teams kept to what they were comfortable with. For BAP Zen compositions, they still had the main support play BAP, usually, and the flex support play Zen. Remember that essentially all professional Overwatch 2 players were competing at some level during Overwatch 1 as well, so they all played Overwatch 1. So the flex supports know Zen, and the main supports do know a bit of BAP. When Allari came around, she essentially played the same role as Zen, and is mostly played with Baptiste. At this point, you should likely understand where this is going. If your main support is most likely experienced to some extent with Baptiste, then your flex support will end up on Allari. Allari is also pretty similar to other flex supports, so it's easier for those players to draw off of that existing skill set. To further support this idea that Allari falls under flex support, most teams that have 2 flex supports on their roster will put in their second flex support player for those BAP Allari compositions. One example is Falcons with Sir Majed, and there are other teams that do the same exact thing. Now, although there's a large amount of evidence to support the idea that Allari and Zen are flex supports, in the modern day, more and more main support players are learning flex support heroes. It has become more common for main supports to learn Allari in particular, which has resulted in a good bit of discourse over Allari's true role. At the moment, it's safest to say that Allari is a flex support, but remember that main support players will not shy away from learning her. Alright, so at this point we've essentially covered everything to do with the support team roles, but I do want to bring up a few things before I close up with this video. The first problem I want to address is the issue of conflicting definitions for main and flex support. Basically, the casual Overwatch community, over time, decided to try and organize supports as well. Usually these categorizations will be based on healing. I've most often heard the terms main healer and off healer, but I've also heard players straight up call them main and flex support, which, oh my goodness, as you can imagine, is incredibly confusing and results in outright misinformation. It's gotten so bad that a lot of streamers that solely play on the ranked ladder have accidentally spread misinformation about the support roles, claiming that Lucio is a flex support because he heals less, or claiming that Ana is a main support because she heals more. I actually don't blame these streamers because they simply aren't in the competitive sphere, and therefore you really can't expect them to know what they're talking about. It's just not their fault. Something important to remember about main and flex support is that you are never using these roles in-game. These roles are meant to define specializations for professional players, so you don't use these terms in-game. No professional player will ever ask for a main support or call to kill the main support in-game. The roles are a way for players to communicate to other people what they play, and that's all it is. Calyx is a main support player. Managers and coaches know this, so they're going to sign Calyx to play main support heroes. Izayaki is a flex support player, and managers and coaches know this, so they're going to sign Izayaki to play flex support heroes. When you are building a roster, at minimum, you are going to sign one main support player and one flex support player. This is the purpose of the roles, to define a player's general hero pool. The casual developed roles of main healer and off healer are meant to be used in-game, and they wouldn't work for the purposes of defining hero pools, since healing output is less important than historical meta patterns. Either way though, these categorizations are still kind of useless, even for your average ladder player. The most common use of these terms I see is of players asking in-game for a main healer. This is pretty stupid. When you're asking for a different support, what you should do is ask for this specific hero or heroes that work in that situation. If you are playing Winston, you would 100% rather have an Ana over a Baptiste. If you are up against a dive composition, you are asking for a Brig, not just an off support. If you are playing Reinhardt, you are asking for a Lucio to enable you, not a random off support. So what upper level players will do is simply ask for the hero for the job, because that is the only logical course of action. Main healer and off healer are essentially useless terms. This video ended up being much longer than I expected, but I really wanted to create a video that fully explains the support roles in a way that anyone can understand. Without a bit of historical context, I feel that it is too easy to get lost and the roles just make zero sense. And as a bit of an ending statement, I did not invent these roles. These roles have been around since I first competed in low-tier tournaments as a main support player back in 2017. These roles are not new, and they do have a real purpose. The fundamental organization of these roles is not really up for debate, and this video also isn't meant to be an opinion piece on support roles. I'm presenting as much objective information as I can, and communicating all of it to inform about the roles. There is discourse over the exact placement of heroes such as Allari, and that's fine, and that makes sense. That's not what I'm talking about. Just don't go claiming I made all this up and say that Ana is a main support, because that is just objectively incorrect. I cannot stress enough that this is not an opinion piece. Also, as one tiny side note, I did not mention Juno in this video, and that was on purpose since her role is still kind of being decided, but at the moment she seems to be heading down the main support route. She is often played alongside Ana in hyper-aggressive diva compositions. Think of it as Ana Lucio on steroids. This means that the flex support is usually on Ana, and the main support on Juno. For now, it seems like the focus is having main support players learn Juno, but this could quickly change. As we learn more, I'm sure we'll have a better understanding of which player will typically run the Juno. I am also working on a Juno video to talk about these hyper-aggro compositions and break them down. Anyways, that's it for today. Down below, let me know what you think about the support roles and if you knew what they were prior to this video. This is a bit of a different kind of video. I am enjoying testing some new things out, so thank you for sticking with me. Check out my Discord for new updates and my stream schedule, and I'll be back with more content soon.